Hey y'all, it's Rachel here with the Shades of Orange, and here today I want to talk about the horror and thriller books I've been reading recently. And I'm putting on this very terrible accent because today I have a space horror western to talk about, as well as some other books that I think are great. But I think especially this one is going to appeal to a lot of you. It has Mandalorian and Firefly vibes, and I'm so excited to talk about it and share it with you all. So let's get started. With that book, and that is The Strange by Nathan Ballingrud. And this is a brand new release. It's a sci-fi horror book, but I felt that it leaned more into the horror element, so I'm putting in this video rather than my SFF content. And in the story, it's a piece of alternate history, so it's set in the 1930s, but it appears to be the future because of the fact that we have now colonized Mars. The story is told from the perspective of a young teenage girl who is living on Mars with her father. Her mother used to be there, but she has since returned to Earth to care for an ailing family member. However, something has happened and there has been a silence that has come between Earth and Mars. They just have lost contact and they don't know what happened back on Earth. And now at the beginning of the story, she's working in the diner with her father. A man comes in and the story goes from there. This is one again that has science fiction elements, but if I'm honest, it reads much more like a Western with the setting, and you really could forget that it's set on Mars. So if you're nervous about reading a science fiction book, if that's not really your thing, but you're interested in reading a Western book or a horror book, this one is going to be right up your alley. I fully admit that this one is slower paced and takes a while to build. It's very atmospheric and the narrative voice is incredible. So even though I don't always love slow paced stories, this one worked very well because it was just so well done for what it was trying to do. After reading this one, I just want to consume all the cowboy and Western books out there. So if you have a favorite Western book, even if it doesn't have a horror or SFF angle, please give me your recommendations down in the comments. I'd also love to do like a Western themed recommendation video if that's not too left field, so let me know. But definitely I need to do some more reading first. But going back to this book, I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I do recommend doing the audio if possible because I really think that the narrator does a great job bringing in that Western cadence with a better accent than I could ever do. And I just loved being in the world, and again it really felt like a space cowboy adventure and just very exciting. It made me want to play Red Dead Redemption and all of these like Western style games and enjoy other media that's Western style, and I'm just kind of obsessed if you can't tell. So highly recommend this one. So much fun, a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but I think I want to get Westerns into my wheelhouse after reading this. Now moving on to other horror books that aren't Western themed, so I'm going to take off this silly hat because I don't think I can pull it off. But the next book I want to talk about is a review copy, and that is We Don't Swim Here by Vincent Tirado. This is a young adult horror book that I accepted for review from the publisher, and in the story we follow a young teenager who is going to a new place. She's reluctant to go there, but she's doing it for the sake of her family. She's there with her cousin and she finds herself being drawn towards this body of water. However, she's told to stay away. This story has a lot of great cultural elements in terms of having an own voices Black perspective, so I appreciated that, but I fully admit that parts of the story did grate on me. The fact is that so much of the story is dependent on the tropey setup of a teenager who is going to a place that they don't want to be in a horror story, and I just find it to be a little bit frustrating, maybe because I'm more so the parent in these situations now, and so whiny young people kind of just annoy me, and so I less felt compassion for her and more just wanted her to like suck it up and do this for her family. For the most part, she wasn't too bad. I've definitely read whinier teenagers, I do want to admit that, but this one was good, enjoyable, but not my favorite, I'll be honest. Next is The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra, which is a horror novella that I received for review from the publisher, and this is an incredibly loose retelling of The Little Mermaid or similar folk tales. And so this story takes place after this mermaid has gone on land and found the prince and gotten married, and then this book starts in the aftermath. So she has had children and the children have possibly started to consume people, so she is now going on the run. She teams up with this plague doctor and the story spirals from there. This is a book I picked up after reading the other author's work, Nothing But Blackened Teeth, and I really enjoyed that one. I found it to be perhaps a little bit straightforward, but I enjoyed the survival horror elements of that one. But this one, I gotta say, is at a whole nother level. The prose is really uplifted, it's complicated and beautiful and lush, and at the same time it's grotesque and dark, and it really turns the mermaids into the creatures and monsters that they are. And so I found this one to just be a beautiful experience. I fully admit that I wasn't completely attached to the elements of the plot. I didn't particularly care what happened, and I wasn't overly concerned about the plague doctor's role in all this. But was this a beautiful, wonderful experience with a book? Absolutely. I just really enjoyed spending time in this weird place that the author wrote, and I definitely want to read more mermaid horror books after this. I definitely see a recommendation video coming your way. I just need to do a little bit more reading, but highly recommend this one. Even if you didn't love Nothing But Blackened Teeth, I really do think you should give this one a try, because again, if that book was good, this book is great. I really loved it, and I think a lot of you will too. If you love something that's kind of weird horror with a beautiful literary luscious bent to it, it's just fantastic. Next, let's talk about my horror patron pick for the month of April, and that was Hunted by Darcy Coates. And this is a story of a girl who is going hiking, and she appears to disappear, and so her friends become concerned and they go off to look for her. This is a somewhat classic survival story narrative. There are characters that are possibly gonna die, possibly not, and we as a reader are going along for that ride. We need to find out what is actually happening. Is there a monster or a serial killer? Will this lead into the supernatural or otherwise? And I will leave it all for you to experience yourself. I fully admit that I haven't read a lot of Darcy Coates' work, despite the fact that she is very prolific, and I do tend to look for female horror authors. And it's simply the fact that I would say 90% of what she writes is haunted house stories. However, again, this one is survival horror, which is probably one of my favorite subgenres, and it was definitely a fun ride. I thought it was good. I don't think she writes anything special in terms of character development or prose compared to something, again, like the last book I just talked about. This one was good. It was functional, but it didn't really excite me in the same way. That being said, I had a lot of fun kind of cheering for the characters, guessing who was going to live and die. And again, because I read it with my book club, we all got to discuss it, which definitely uplifted the experience. It made it more fun than if I had just been reading it by myself. So if you love survival horror, and especially if you're looking to get into Darcy Coates' work and aren't a haunted house story fan like myself, I think this is a really good entry point. It was a solid read, it was enjoyable, and overall I had a good time with it, which is really all I'm asking for. Next, I read Lesson Zero by Bret, Easton, Ellis, and this is a somewhat literary thriller book that is a slice of life tale of a young man who is coming back from college, going back to LA to celebrate Christmas with his friends. And this is a book that, of course, I want to read because it's by the same author as American Psycho. I've really been enjoying that, as well as Lunar Park. And so I've actually been most interested in reading The Shards next, which is his newest release. But a few people in the comments when I mentioned that before told me that I should read this, ideally because there is going to be references to this one in The Shards, and so I definitely want to get the best reading experience. This one I was a little bit reluctant to pick up in the first place because I knew it didn't really have a horror thriller mystery element. Instead, it's about an incredibly privileged group of young people who are bored, they are drinking and doing drugs and just being kind of terrible people. I do think that Ellis has a talent for writing incredibly unlikable characters, and while I would still say the main character in Lunar Park is far worse, these people are not people that I would actually want to spend time with. So I like this book. I do think he's incredible when it comes to his prose, but this one kind of lacked plot, and I just didn't really want to read nothing but people going around and smoking and going to parties. I'm fine to read that as part of the plot, but when it's the entire thing, I did get a little bit bored in places. So I'm glad I read this so I can move on to The Shards, which I think I'm gonna love a lot more based off what I've heard about it. So stay tuned for that. And then I read Stolen by Annette LaPointe, and this story follows a man who is a drug dealer and a thief. He is a violent criminal, and this is a somewhat slice of life story that is set in Western Canada, where the author is from. And so within the story, we basically follow this man as he is doing horrible things. I fully admit that this is the kind of book that wouldn't normally be up my alley, but a few things happen. So one being the fact that I have a connection to some of the places where the author was writing about, and so I really was drawn into those descriptions. But I do think that even if you're not from those places and don't have that history and backstory with the author's placement of where the story is put, I do feel like the story just will pull you in because the writing was really nice. I felt like the author did a great job of creating a character who is very morally gray, but is very relatable, understandable. And again, I really could understand and visualize so much of what was happening. And I think that the author just did a really good job of just creating a sense of place and time and nostalgia. And I just, again, found this character, he's not a likable man, but I really want to know his story. I want to see how he got to where he was, why he did what he did, and just everything that came. So again, while this book deals with like drugs and all of that, there isn't a lot of action. Instead, it's kind of slower paced. It's more of a character study, if anything. And I think it's really ironic that in this video, I'm talking about two different books that deal heavily with drugs, which I think is super funny considering the fact that I recently reviewed the story of Junk, and I talked about how I never read books about this, and here I am reading another story, but actually two stories on the same topic. So don't worry, I'm not going to become a drug book review channel, but sometimes I go down a rabbit hole and I don't want to apologize for that. I really enjoyed this one, I'll be honest. And again, I think even if you're not Canadian, I think if you love a really good character story about a dark man, this one is very compelling. I was completely hooked in and loved it. It's slow burning, but I didn't mind it at all. And finally, I want to talk about Will Haunt You by Brian Kirk. And this is a horror book that I highly recommend going in without knowing too much about it, because the Goodreads synopsis completely spoils the entire book from start to finish. Instead, I picked up this book relatively blind. I recognized the cover from Instagram and went into it via the audio, which I think is the best way to do this book, and really enjoyed it. So the basic synopsis, without saying too much, is that we follow a man who is in a rock band. He is somewhat reformed though. He's now a family man. He has a child and a wife. However, he used to be into partying, but he put that aside in order to put his family first, but he still goes out and has gigs. So one night he is going out and playing with his band, and then he ends up getting pulled into this nightmare situation. And that's all you need to know, in my opinion. And I got completely pulled into this story. I feel like I should mention that this book has incredibly low ratings online, and I do somewhat understand that because in some ways this book has a very messy narrative. It goes to some really gross and disgusting and disturbing places, which depending on the mood you're in, you can maybe find this book to be very off-putting. I feel like in a different mood, I could have possibly been turned off by certain things, but for whatever reason, this one really worked for me. It definitely has a psychological aspect to it, and that's why I recommend doing the audiobook if possible, is because I love when it's told to me. I really feel like I get inside the head of the main character, and that's what happened here. And basically this character has a past that is catching up with them. And again, the book synopsis tells you everything that you don't want to know, but instead I think it's so much more fun to figure this out as it is explored and discussed and revealed to the reader along the way. And I found this book to be fascinating. There definitely were some disturbing moments, and again, I thought the narrator really brought the book to life in creating just this like uneven narrative. It's definitely a messy narrative, but it's done on purpose. And again, I think the narrator really brought this book to life because her performance is almost a little bit breathy, it's a little bit uneven, and it just created that really unsettling feeling, which I love to read. I did some of this book at night, and I kind of had to stop reading it at night because it was really starting to affect my dreams, and I just find that to be a really good sign. So I really like this one, and again, I love when a book is like told to me because I really get sucked into it in that way with stories like this. So I like this one, but again, I fully acknowledge that the ratings on Goodreads are not great, so clearly this book is not for everyone, but I'll be honest, it worked really well for me. I was completely pulled in. I think psychological horror is just very hit or miss with people. What one person will find absolutely psychologically scary will completely not work on someone else. So I think that's the case here. I'd love to know if you've read this book, if you had different opinions, different experience, why that is, but I personally recommend this one very cautiously and hope you enjoy it if you decide to read it. So that's it for this video here. Let me know down below in the comments, what books are you planning on checking out? Are you going to check out The Strange or anything else? And I'd also love to hear what is your favorite Western book, whether or not it has a horror or SFF angle to it. I want all your recommendations today because I am obsessed. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I do wear a lot of hats. I also read and review horror, thriller, science fiction, and fantasy. And if you want to help me out with this video here, please give me a thumbs up, drop a comment, even if it's just a little emoticon like a cowboy. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.